Good evening, everybody. My name is Valerie Hardy, and I am the principal next door at Mary Ellen Henderson, and thank you for joining us tonight as we talk to you a little bit about the approaches we're using when we talk about grading and assessment for the middle years program, which your students are participating in. Before we get started tonight, I'd like to do a few introductions. We've got with us Laura Lane, who is our MYP coordinator. She spends time at both MEH and at GM. Steve Knight, who I saw earlier, there he is, our coordinator of digital learning. Darcy Hood, who is a language and lit teacher here at George Mason and is also piloting some of the work we're going to talk about tonight. Two teachers from MEH, 6th grade English teachers, Leah Partridge and Marlia Liebner. And then Mr. Hills, principal from Mason, is going to join us, but for right now we've got Mr. Sorrentis, assistant principal. So to get started, we want to give you a little bit of an overview around the mission statement and then the work as it leads to IB. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Lane.
Okay, so we just wanted to ground our work tonight in the mission statement of IB, and if you take a look at the screen up here, I don't want to read it to you, but the second sentence there talks about the fact that the IB offers an international education and rigorous assessment. And we aren't going to go into too much detail tonight about what rigorous assessment means, but we define it here in Falls Church City as age appropriate for the student. But we are also going to be talking about how it is criterion referenced tonight and what that means and how that shows up in Power Teacher Pro. And so just a little bit of background on IB in Falls Church City. You can see over there on the right-hand side of your screen that we've been a very proud diploma program school. That means for students in grades 11 and 12 since 1981. And we decided to embark upon a journey back in 2012 to add the primary years program to TJ and Mount Daniel. And so they were brought on board then, and then in about 2015 or so, 2014 or 15, the school district decided to go ahead and then close that gap between the primary years program in 5th grade and the diploma program in 11th grade by adding the IB middle years program. And so in January of this current year, we were authorized by the IB organization to offer officially the IB Middle Years program. And it is a unique and intricate program. There's a lot of facets to it, and it's about educating the whole child. Student-centered instruction in an inquiry-based way. And so we're actually going to try to model some of that for you tonight. We're going to do a little inquiry-based activity that models how MYP assessment works in just a few minutes. So that aligns with our vision for Falls Church City Schools because Dr. Noonan has rallied around the IB programs and has set forth our charge to become the premier IB World School in the state of Virginia. And I believe he would probably like to say the entire world. So it's a lofty goal for us to meet. So to bring it back to just focusing in on the assessment piece of MYP, there are a couple of things here that the guides that we have, and I brought examples to show you. We have a lot of documents that our teachers use to help plan. So these are just examples to show, but we have one called the Principles into Practice, which outlines, you can see it's pretty thick, all of the things that we take into account when we're planning instruction for our students. Every subject also has their own subject guide. So most of the information that I'm sharing with you tonight came out of these documents. And so we aim to support and encourage student learning by providing feedback on the learning process. And I highlighted a couple of really important words in that first bullet point because again, it is all about what the students are learning, and it's about a process, how they're learning, and then how they are able to articulate what they know and can do for us in the classroom. The assessment practices that we use also aim to inform and enhance and improve the teaching process because if the teachers aren't informed about what the students know and can do, then they can't plan to fill in the gaps and help strengthen and help push and challenge students to the levels that they are capable of. We also, though, want to promote positive student attitudes towards learning. We don't want students to feel like they're being knocked down. So the criterion referenced method is a method that allows students to monitor their growth and grow on the 1 to 8 point scale, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. And finally, it all aims to promote critical and creative thinking skills. So We're going to start with our group activity, and it is the best cookie activity. It's actually from a book called Chocolate Chip Cookies and Rubrics. And so what we are going to do is have you at your table, really quick, you've got a couple markers and a piece of chart paper, and as a group, I want you to write down the criteria that you think makes the best chocolate chip cookie. Before you start doing that, I need you to think about some categories. What kinds of things make the best chocolate chip cookie? All right, so these are our directions here, and you're gonna identify up to 3 criteria and define a high achievement level for those criteria. So I'm gonna give you an example. If you were to say crunchiness is something that you value in a chocolate chip cookie, what level of crunchiness would define the highest level of crunchiness for you, okay? So just at your table, talk for a few minutes and come up with 3 different criteria and define what maybe the lowest level would look like, a middle level, and a high level in that particular criteria, all right? So, as you were writing, yours may have turned out looking something like the one on the screen. Maybe not. That's okay, because you as a group collaboratively decided what it was that you valued in a chocolate chip cookie. So now Ms. Hood is going to be bringing you a series of plates of cookies. And if you don't want to eat it, you don't have to, but you can certainly pick it up and play with it and kind of see how it measures up to your criteria. Okay, so hopefully you have tried to figure out a score, a best fit score for your first chocolate chip cookie. And Ms. Hood is now going to bring you a second chocolate chip cookie to score. Okay, so I just want to remind you that judge your cookies against the criteria that you set. Try not to judge the cookies against each other. You strictly judge them against the criteria you set. And we have 1/4 cookie coming out in just a moment. Last cookie. Okay, so this activity was aimed to give you a little insight into the process that teachers go through as they begin to determine what criteria students need to meet in order to perform at certain levels on assessments. And so basically, with criteria, you always have a reference point to improve, and it's the teacher's job to help those students grow in their classrooms, and if we had taken this and added numbers to it, like you might see on the MYP rubrics that come home, and we're going to take a look at it in just a second, you will see that there is typically a growth mindset language listed in from the 1 to the 8. So, if you want to take a look at your handout, because I know the screen is very tiny, we are looking at the pages right now that have page 27 and 31 at the bottom. These are pages that came out of some of those guides that I showed you earlier in the presentation. So looking at page 27 to start. So every MYP subject, meaning every course in grades 6 through 10, has a set of objectives that the teachers need to teach. They are divided into 4 areas, and so you can see on page 27, this is an example from a social studies class, which in IB we call individuals and societies. And so on the left-hand side, it says knowing and understanding. At the end of year 5, which is grade 10, students should be able to use a wide range of terminology and context and demonstrate knowledge and understanding of subject-specific content and concepts through developed descriptions, explanations, and examples. So it is every social studies teacher's job to ensure that they are teaching the students those objectives. And then you can see in the larger chart on the right-hand side of that page how it is then broken out into a set of criteria on a 1 to 8 scale, although there is a 0 listed for a student does not reach a standard identified by any of the descriptors below. And so perhaps maybe you thought when you got that peppermint Oreo cookie, you thought this doesn't meet the criteria because we were defining what a chocolate chip cookie criteria was. And so perhaps it could be a 0, but this table here I noticed they had crunchiness and they were able to still split their cookie and give some feedback, determine a score for the level of crunchiness on it. And so often that's the case with teachers as well. They'll be able to take an assessment that students turn in and provide some feedback on where they are, judge it against some of the criteria, but sometimes not all of the criteria, because maybe the student hasn't quite made the mark. So if you take a look on the next page, turn over to page 31. This is just another example of another rubric. And this one is also from Individuals and Societies, and this is Criterion C, communicating. So the objectives, again, are listed at the top, and then it's broken into a 1 to 8 scale. So what you'll notice so far, hopefully, from looking at knowing and understanding Criterion A and then Criterion C, communicating, is that these are pretty broad criteria. They're not content specific. In that the students under knowing and understanding need to memorize all the facts of the Civil War. What they need to know is relevant terminology and be able to use that relevant terminology in context. That's what it's asking. And then for Criterion C, you'll see that it is asking students to communicate information and ideas with clarity. So then can they share that information back to the teacher in a clear way that is accurate? So you can read through all of that. And so every course has a set of 4 rubrics similar to this. Not yet. And if you would like to actually flip back, one more page, to the page that says 81 at the bottom, using MYP assessment criteria. This is an overview of all the criteria for all of the courses. So when you see things in the gradebook, and Mr. Knight's going to come up in just a moment to show you what it looks like in the gradebook, you might see in a language and literature class or English class, you'll see analyzing, organizing, producing text, using language. You'll see in the Spanish and the Mandarin and the French classes, the ones that are listed there under language acquisition. So all of the teachers in all the courses are using these, and they all have a set of rubrics. If you are in a class that received the emailed letter home, and you also have a copy of the letter tonight, in case you're not in a class that received that, the teachers were asked to attach their specific rubrics to that email that went home. So hopefully you received those. They are also available on, I believe, the GM site. If they are not currently, it's because we switched the site, and they will be very soon, so that you can go and see all of the rubrics for all of the courses, just like the example from page 31 here that we took a look at. Okay, so with that, I'm going to have Mr. Knight come up and talk to you a little bit about his take on it from an educator perspective as well as a parent perspective.
That's right. Thank you. My daughter is going through this. Well, actually, my wife and I are going through this because my daughter is in English class, and she is getting these types of grades. So it was a conversation that I've had with my wife, especially about this part. And this was one of those things where, just as an educator, when I'm thinking about breaking down the rubric or breaking down what it means, this is what I showed my wife, and I think she felt much better because my daughter's getting 4s because she's developing. It's the beginning of the year. She's working as hard as she can. But as we can see here, she's on her way. And as we start thinking about the criteria, and as we start seeing the grades and the measurements in the rubrics, it's important to understand that it is a journey. And if our kids automatically got an A or an 8, where do they go from there? So when I talk to my daughter and my wife and translate the criteria and say that this is where she is and she's developing, it made a little bit more sense. Hopefully that makes sense to you too. This was another one that's very helpful, and I think from an educator standpoint, as we start moving and having these conversations, this was one of my favorite graphics that we've shared and we've talked about, because this is really where we see the action. So if my daughter is at a 4, these are the command words, or these are the things that we're expecting from her. And so as she moves on, we're hoping that she's going to do more, the complex, explain, she's going to deduce, she's going to interpret as she moves to 5 and 6. And I was just talking more of the critical thinking column there. But when we talk about where she is now, she's, occasionally doing it. At the 4, she's adequate. So she has places to grow because instruction just started. So we're moving forward. End of the first quarter is happening pretty soon, I think. So she has plenty of time to move up this scale. So this really helps us. You'll see this language in the handouts you had, because in the way the criteria and the rubrics and how we're measuring kids, you're going to see these words over and over again. Now, this was probably one of the best, kind of examples of what we're talking about and what we're changing, how we measure our students. Because if we think of the Olympics, right, and we think of this kind of scenario, what as an athlete, are we counting everything? Are we averaging all their times through their careers? As they're racing and as they're hitting their qualifying matches and the final matches and maybe going to the big show, the Olympics, are we averaging it? Are we counting all that? Or are we working towards something that is great? So as we see this, I think if you take a look there, should we average all, competition completions times to come up with the average swimmer score? It doesn't happen. Now, it does help athletes get to that level, and that's what we're helping our kids get to, because we're giving them certain languages, certain kind of check-ins. And so I think the last one there, if they get to the Olympics, or if they had a bad race, do we take away their record? Do we take away their award? So it's a journey. It's a back and forth, and that's one of those things where I think if we go back to this, even though we're progressing, we're recognizing that it could go back and forth, especially as we move up in the levels, as we advance, as we do more complex things. Did I do justice to that? You did. Okay, good. So this is what the gradebook looks like, and I'm hoping you all have access to the Power School gradebook. If you don't, I'm the guy to give it to you. So I can create an account for you. I can make sure all your kids, if you have kids in all the schools, I can connect them all there. But this is what it looks like. So when you go into the grade, and this is an example at a high school, and this is only one assignment. But if you take a look at the very top there, you'll see the traditional score. You'll see an 85. If you look at that orange arrow, that's the 85%. Okay, so that's what we're used to seeing. But when you click on, and if you ever see that little blue button that I circled with that green circle, that gives you the more information. So if there is a standard applied to this assignment, you'll see that little blue box, and you can click, and now you're going to see the standards that our kids are being measured by. And then you're going to see the grades. So if you take a look at standard 1, the formulate and clear and focus research, there's an 8. They demonstrated the top of the proficiency. But if you take a look at the second standard in year 5, D1, they're still at a 4. So if we think of that scale, this information is not just to help us see the journey and the progress of our kids, but it's also informing the students on where they are and how they need to progress and how they need to get a little better and get up towards the higher proficiency. Here's another example, and this is from year 5. Okay, so this is 6th grade, 8th, 9th grade. And if you take a look here, there's an 80%. I took the student's name off, thankfully. Remember to do that. 80%, which is good. And you can see that little box is there, and so you see the 2 standards. Now, Ms. Hood, I'm putting you on the spot.
That's fine.
But would you like to come up to the mic and kind of explain your thought process of this?
Sure.
Did we warn her about that?
I guess.
Oh, good.
That's all right. I'm good with it.
Here you go.
Thanks. Okay, so I can't use these to do that. Okay, so justifies opinions and ideas using examples, explanation, and terminology. That's what the focus has been for the whole unit, starting with smaller formative assessments, really getting kids to understand that they need to use evidence from the text to support their ideas. And so even small little paragraphs, I've attached this rubric to it. And so the hope is that with all the feedback that they're getting and seeing as we do different activities, when we get to the summative assessment, they've mastered this skill. So we're not assessing them on every single skill. It's what we're focused on in each unit, and they should build upon each other. So for this one, this was in the very beginning. We're doing a formative assessment And we're trying to sort of mirror what the summative assessment is going to look like. So they've seen what it is before they actually get to the summative assessment. Do you want to ask me questions? Because I'm not quite sure how else to explain this. There are strands. I'm not sure if we went through this. Did we go through this already? So in each criteria, there are different strands. And so even if we're focused on analyzing, it might not be everything in the rubric. It might just be 2 of the strands that we're focusing on. And that's what you see here, A.3. So that's just that strand. It's not all of the strands that are on the rubric. Yes?
Now, the 5-4 number, is that based on the questions they got right?
No. That's based on the rubric, kind of like what you did with the cookies, right? So it's not based on the number they got right. It's based on the skill level that they're at. So how did they justify opinions and ideas? And when you look at the rubric, you can see that they're at the level where they're getting better, but they haven't mastered it yet. And that's what the 5 represents. Do you want to?
I can pull
Yeah.
up that rubric really quick.
Separate from the 80.
Well, yes and no.
I'm going to show you
yeah.
that next. I'm going to
Okay.
show you that piece next. But I can show you really quick the rubric for that one. I should have anticipated adding it in there, so hang on. There's a whole bunch of documents, a whole bunch of guides. Give me a second. It is a few more pages down. That was A, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Analyzing.
Okay, so the student got a 5. So this is what the 5, 6 looks like right there.
So they're competent, but they haven't, they're not, they haven't mastered it yet. So the 5 represents, the work that they're doing and then the work that they still need to do. And hopefully the formative assessments are where that's happening, so that when they get to the summative assessment, they've mastered this strand.
Going back to the original, that grade sheet,
You wanna do
whatever that was. I guess I was just asking, because I was reading here, and if I'm jumping ahead, just tell me.
You're good.
But it says here, I'm just looking at this chart, and it says if 1 criterion was assessed, 2, 3, 4. So is that considered 2 for the 80? How?
I will explain that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So no, I'll explain that for you. So thank you, Ms. Hood. So every subject group has 4 criteria, and so if the teachers only use 1 rubric, so if they only use A, knowing and understanding, or A, analyzing, then their score is going to be 1 to 8. And then they convert it from that. So let's say that the student on that particular one on criterion A had a 5. So that's how then we go look back over, and it's a range between an 80 and an 84, and a teacher uses their professional judgment, we'll talk about that in just a minute, to determine if it's an 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, based upon students' overall work that they're doing in class. Okay? If the teacher uses criterion A and criterion B to score an assignment, then they would go to the 2 criteria column, because now we have 16 points that we're dealing with. It's no longer 1 to 8, because criterion A is 1 to 8 and criterion B is 1 to 8. Yes. So if we go back here, we can see that Ms. Hood, when she did this, she used, and it's a very teacher naming convention, okay? So we have Lang Lit, that means language and literature, English, year 5, so that's for us, it's grade 9 and 10 use the year 5, and then A3, that means criterion A, analyzing, and that's strand 3. So in this bullet point that we were looking at just a second ago, you can see there's 4 Roman numerals for criterion A. So that means that she was just assessing this one strand 3 as she was doing that particular assessment. And if she had done all of them, then they would have all shown up in the grade book. But she was just looking at whether or not students could justify opinions and ideas with examples and explanations in that particular assignment. Yes, ma'am.
I feel like I'm on The Price is Right or something. My question is, is that posted somewhere, the criterion? Am I supposed to push a button or something? Oh. Where can we see that criteria?
Okay. Yep, so the handout there has just the broad categories for you and all of the individual rubrics. We sent them out at the end of last year when we reported the final achievement levels for the students, and it got published on the school website. Over the summer, the school website transitioned to a new site, and we're still working to transfer all of the information. So I'm not 100% positive that they are there currently, but I can promise you that I will have them there in the very near future. Like listed, there's an IB drop down and it says middle years program, and I'll have them linked there so that you can access all of them for all grade levels and all subjects.
Will that be before the end of the reporting period?
I will make sure, I will work with Mr. Knight. We can probably get that taken care of. I don't know what your schedule's like tomorrow, but we can probably get that done tomorrow. Okay, they're already ready. It's just a matter of making sure the link is in the right place. Yes.
Question here. So I'm trying to understand, I'm sorry, can you leave that back up there? I'm trying to understand how the student will use this information or this feedback to improve. I mean, don't they need more specific guidance about what they need to improve on?
Yep. Ms. Hood, do you want to come back, or Ms. Partridge, do you want to come talk about it?
So one of the best practices that we've been doing a lot in the 6th grade is before we even give the students the assignment, we go through the rubric and talk about each individual criteria as a class, what that looks like, make sure that they kind of have an understanding of where they're going. And then from there, when we give them that rubric back, it has our notes, it has our comments, it has our suggestions on it. And in fact, we actually had the students look at those notes themselves. We didn't give them a number score on one of theirs and said, where do you think you are based on all of these notes? They were hands down picking the right spot. They could tell within just looking at what the teacher said, oh, I know I didn't quite hit the strong category in this because I didn't hit this criteria. I didn't meet this specific strand. So the students have had a lot of practice looking at those individual strands and looking at what that looks like before they are released for a summative assessment. So they have a lot of practice time. In fact, I have my students, and Ms. Liebner has had it as well, write goals based on the feedback that they got. What would you like to work on to get a higher score the next time?
So you said you do that for your class. Do all the teachers do this?
That's part of what the MYP process is. I can't speak to other teachers, but that is what we're working towards, is giving the students that feedback and letting them make those improvements. It can go, I can speak to the English again in 6th grade. So the 6th grade students have those either on paper, if they turned it in on paper, or if they turn it in on the computer, then they have that feedback on the computer. Yeah.
So I understand that you that they can get feedback from looking at the rubric and looking at where they need to grow, but just in terms of them looking at Power School, should they be focusing on the what is it called? The 5s and 4s and whatever, or should they be more focused on the grades? What do you suggest?
I suggest that you look at the criterion because I think that's a more positive way for the kids to look. They're like, instead of, oh man, I got a C, they're, oh, I'm developing, I need to work into these things in order to be proficient. And I think it just changes their look on, instead of thinking, oh, I'm a C student, they think, oh, I need to work on this to be proficient. So it's a more positive way. I've had a lot of kids who said, but Ms. Partridge, I'm just developing, it's fine. I'm like, oh, okay, you're right. Let's move on. What can we do to get a little bit better here? What can we work on? So.
I'm just curious, because I'm looking here at the F. If a kid does the work, but they can only get, I guess, an F, does doing the work and still turning in everything warrant an F? I mean, an F is, to me, is you didn't do anything. But if they worked and really tried hard, I mean, to get an F.
So the MYP scoring is about criterion referenced, and so the teachers set the criteria based upon what they've taught, and they explain that to the students ahead of time. And it's all spelled out. They make it task specific. It's very generic on these rubrics that are provided to us by IB, and that's intentional, so that we can add details that make it specific to every assessment task that the students are asked to do. if you, when you look at them, if you look at the example one from Social Studies, Individuals and Societies that was on, I think, page 31, the C communicating, you will notice that the 1-2 level is limited, shows limited knowledge, or does basic minimum work. And so the level 0, I mean, a student would really have to do nothing or really miss the mark in order to get that 1 or that 0. So students are working on assessments in class, they're getting constant feedback, and they're growing on that. And it's not, again, it's not about effort at this point, because we're giving students a score based upon the level they achieved on that criteria that the teachers were asking them to meet. And so if they completely miss the mark, then yes, that's where they're going to fall. But are they going to have the chance to grow in that area at another time? Absolutely. But we do also want to talk about the, I don't have a slide for it, but it's in your handout.
I think the conversion chart is important to bring up again too, because it's not like 1 out of 8 is an F, right? Because you can see up here, it's probably more like a B minus, or, so 4 out of 8 is not a 50%. Right. Even though it seems, you know, like logically that it would be a 50% because it's 4 out of 8. But on the conversion chart, you can see that it's a 75 to a 79. So it's important to note that, because and the kids have to get used to that as well when they see that number.
So on the second page of the handout, we gathered some research from 2008 or 2006 through 2017, I believe, or 2016 was the latest article. So this is current educational trends that are happening around the U.S. All of, they're summarized here. 4 different articles are summarized for you, and I just wanted to draw your attention to the top right, where it says grading, why teachers should trust their judgment. And you can see there's an example there of how the students are in the top box there, where Gloria and Ralph and the learning target 1. So that would be specifically like 1 MYP assessment criteria. Imagine it says that there. And the students have multiple opportunities to show that they are able to meet that particular criteria. And then the chart below that then shows the different ways that the grade could be calculated. If you average them, Gloria would end up, even though she had several 1s and 2 4s, if you average them, it ends up being a 2. But if you look to the very right-hand column where it says teacher's professional judgment, which is what IB asks us to do, you will see that Gloria has ended up with a 4, which is in fact a higher score than just averaging the scores that she had received previously. So this is pretty intricate system that IB is asking us to follow, and while we're talking tonight about grades 6 through 10, there is a similar process in grades 11 and 12 that is used with the diploma courses. And we are asking for teachers to use their best fit judgment, professional judgment. So we will know that if a student has put forth a lot of effort, they have the opportunity to adjust their FCCPS score completely. They can put in Power School if they know that a student has worked really hard all quarter towards an assessment, but maybe on the actual assessment they scored 1s across the board. They can go above that 64 at the teacher's professional judgment based upon other assignments that have happened that were around that same standard or same objective. This is a guide to give the teachers a starting point, this particular conversion chart here. Does that help answer it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That last piece was good.
Okay.
So each subject has 4 criteria, but not every criterion has the equal amount of strands. Okay. So why is it that, for simplification purposes, why did we come up with an A.3 instead of an A. If we need to interface and we would have to look at the third bullet instead of using A.III, why do we put A.3?
That is not, I don't have an answer for that. At central office, they put all of the information into Power School for us, and I'm not sure why they decided to do that. We just went with it. But I can ask them and then maybe get back to you.
And one last question. When you talk of professional judgment among teachers, so how consistent can a teacher be? For example, this is my first year ever to do IB and adopting this Rubicon. And for simplification, for discussion purposes, I would say that in the first week that, say, Adam, my student, is exhibiting what could be like an numerical 8th grade student. And then come the year after, I would encounter, say, Jane. And in theory, Jane could only be 7, but I pinpoint Jane as my brightest, so I elevated her to 8. So despite these standards that supposedly guide you, how do we consistently apply the standards instead of, moving it based on the brightest student or on the lowest student?
So we absolutely use that set of criteria every time, and so it's never a student compared to another student or a class compared to another class. It's always the student compared to the criteria, and where does the student fall? Additionally, we have checks and balances in place. Every teacher is put on a collaborative team, and they do the same process that you did as a collaborative group with the chocolate chip cookie with all of their summative assessment tasks. So at the end of the unit, whenever there's an assessment, whether it's a paper, a project, a test, they come together and score several of them together around the table to determine a common understanding of the criteria before they go back and they score the rest of their papers individually. So there is a checks and balances, and you're probably thinking, like, this must take the teachers forever. And that is true, it does, but it gets faster as you do it. I would hope that you would agree with that, right? Like, it gets faster the more you do it.
Can I say too that I think using these rubrics, I think keeps us or helps us to not use I don't know what the word is that I want to use. Say that again. Yeah, arbitrary grades. Or we might say, oh, Janie's my favorite, and I think it's not a 7, it's an 8. We're having the rubric and having the strands to look at really does keep it focused on what are the skill levels. And using those in the gradebook, it's not just my saying, I think it's an 85. It's me looking at the strands and saying, these strands together, this is the skill level where this student is, and that helps to, I think, for me, it's made my grading a far more focused. And this is the first year that I've used the, standards. None of us have used them.
Another piece that's really helpful with grading on the rubric is we don't have to grade everything, and as an English teacher, that's a really big thing. It means that if we're grading for analyzing, we don't have to necessarily grade for their use of language. So they could spell things wrong and still score high in the analysis, which on a traditional grade, you could be penalized for not being able to spell, even though your analysis is excellent. So I think it gives the teachers a lot of freedom to really grade your students or assess your students on what they know and what they're actually capable of achieving.
Thank you very much. Since it sounds like it's an objective, rather in a subjective way at a higher level to come up with a rubric and the decision on how to grade the students, is it possible to involve them in the process before they do an assessment or a test or a quiz, explain to them clearly what are the expectations are for that particular assignment in front of them, so that as they are doing it, they know in what direction they are going? And so the results won't be a surprise to them, and eventually they'll know in which areas they have to improve and which are the areas that they can, work on.
Absolutely, and actually, so in the middle years program, we actually subscribe to what's called the backwards planning process. It's actually understanding by design, and so the teachers actually, the very first thing they do when they sit down to plan a unit is they design the assessment first and the rubric first. So they should be sharing, maybe not the actual assignment with the students right at the very beginning of the unit, but they should be verbally explaining where we're going in this unit and what the students will be expected to do at the end, and then they should be sharing that rubric with the students either at the beginning of the unit or prior to taking the assessment. And that is an expectation of all of our middle years program teachers, so all teachers in grades 6 through 10. If you're not seeing those, that's a great opportunity to contact me or contact the building level administrator to say like, hey, I know my student has an assessment and this teacher, I haven't seen a rubric. It would be really great if the teacher could use it. I do want to point out the timeline because while all of our teachers are implementing middle year's program at this point, not all of them are quite 100% with these rubrics and attaching the standards in the gradebook. We have some pioneers that have were really early adopters of moving forward with this because they were comfortable with it, and so some of them are here tonight. We do have others. Here at George Mason is Mr. Duche, who teaches individuals and societies, and Mr. Stewart, who teaches science. We also have Ms. Tews, who's teaching English. At the middle school, we obviously have our 2 6th grade language and literature teachers. We have Mr. Vu and Mr. Mandel, who are 8th grade language and literature teachers, and we have Ms. Troubles and Ms. Johnson, who are 7th grade science teachers. So those are really the only teachers that have delved into this deeply so far. Other teachers may join in at second quarter because I think teachers are finding that it's actually easier to do it this way than it is to do it the traditional way. I actually had a teacher come to me and Mr. Knight yesterday kind of saying that she was ready to jump on. And so Ms. Tews and Ms. Johnson couldn't be here tonight, but they felt it was important that their voice be heard, so they have shared these 2 quotes with me to share with you. And so Ms. Tews said, "It's so much easier for teachers and it's more meaningful for students and parents." And Ms. Johnson says, "It's a true indication of where they are. In 7th grade science, they are learning skills," and she meant at the beginning of the year. "Don't expect them to be a master of it right now. They just learned it and they will practice it all year long." So similar to what we heard our other teachers here tonight say. So I think we've already done a lot of questions. I want to be mindful of time. If we have, yeah, we can have one last question.
Well, when does FCCPS expect every teacher to be compliant utilizing this?
That's a great question. I'm going to let Ms. Hardy and Mr. Hills answer that because I'm not in charge.
So you said, when is every teacher going to be compliant, correct? Correct, okay. So what we're looking for is full implementation starting next year. That's the plan. Hence why we're rolling it out. We have 5 teachers right now.
6 now.
6 now, we
Yeah.
added 1,
Yeah, we
that's
added
right,
one, yep.
that are really piloting the program, and we're hopeful that their feedback is going to be really beneficial to some of our other teachers who are going to be starting it next year.
Right. And then Mr. Knight, you want to?
Yeah, just one of the things to keep in mind, like I mentioned, if you don't have Power School or you have Power School questions or you want to explore it together with me, we can do that. I have my, excuse me, I have my computer. I can also create accounts for you if you don't already have them. But one of the things I will recommend is the app is amazing. And the reason I like the app is not that I'm hovering over my daughter's grades in any way, but because I don't have to remember to log in. Apps are always on. So if I'm at a stoplight and I ask Morgan what her grade is and she's like, I don't know, I pick out my phone and there it is. So it's a really good app. It also does a really good job. I don't know if that's familiar. It does a really good job of showing you the standards. So that little blue box that I showed you on how you can see the measure standards, if you your kids that are in classes that have them, you can click on that right away from one click. So I'm here to support you if you want to try to download it. The big thing is that when you download the app, there is a district code that you'll find if you search for Falls Church City Schools. But that NSHQ is really, that's how you connect to our district. And then you would just log in the same way you log into your website, the website, and you'd get it on your app. Okay? So I'm here. I'm over here if you want to have any questions, if you want me to get you an account. Perfect.
Thank you all for coming. If you had friends that couldn't make it tonight, you can take them handouts. This presentation has been filmed and will be on the YouTube channel shortly. And also, I will have put in morning announcements when I get those rubrics linked to the school website. So look for that in the next couple of days to be linked.
And I do want to say that the rubrics are already on the GM website. They're actually part of the student handbook. So there's a lot of great, a lot of the information we went over today is on the student handbook. It's a considerable handbook. There's many, many pages to it. But there's a great table of contents in the beginning that will link you right to the IB program as a whole. So it'll take you to some diploma program information for our juniors and seniors, but for the 6th grade through 12th grade, there's information there too. We will be putting it on the website so it's quicker to find, but if you want that information now, it's part of the student handbook.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Take some cookies.